Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be taking a review of Egypt's foreign policy in the last year of 2016 and the prospects for 2017. We're going to be evaluating what has been achieved so far and what are we supposed to anticipate for this new year. And joining us here in the studio to shed more light on this file is Ambassador Dr. Samir Borhan, former Assistant Foreign Minister. We're also joined by Mr. Hossam Nassar, the former First Secretary of the Ministry of Culture. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Egypt has been doing a lot to regain its pivotal and very important role within the region and within the international community. And in light of that, Russia has actually hoped Egypt would participate in joining the Syria talks in Astana. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Vladimir Putin told President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in a recent phone call that Russian flights to Egypt would resume soon. Putin affirmed Russia's intention to resume regular flights between Moscow and Cairo in the very near future, according to Egypt's presidency. No date was given for flights to resume, however. Flights to Egypt from Russia and to Russia from Egypt were suspended after a Russian plane crashed into Sinai in October 2015. The Airbus A321 operated by Metrojet had been returning holidaymakers from the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh to St. Petersburg. The crash killed all 224 people on board. The air flight suspension has harmed the tourism industry to a great extent. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ahmed Abu Zaid said Egypt and Russia have been able to overcome the negative consequences of the Russian plane crash. In an interview with Russian news agency, Abu Zaid said the crash dominated bilateral relations between the two countries. However, both Russia and Egypt cooperated during all phases of the investigation into the possible cause of the crash and to overcome the aftermath of the tragedy. Abu Zaid further added that there was a mutual desire and political will to overcome this phase and foster cooperation moving forward. He also said there have been a significant enhancement of bilateral ties between the two countries over the past 2 years, which is clear from the regular contact between political
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We apologize for this technical difficulty. We're going to start off our discussion right away. Ambassador Dr. Borhan, how would you evaluate the Egyptian performance by the government and the presidency in actually enhancing and strengthening its own foreign policy over the past year?
Thank you very much for the question. I think our foreign policy was to a great extent successful to overcome any negative elements which has inherited from the past years. So I think the movement of our president to many countries, including the summit Afro-Arab summit in Africa, it was very important for Egypt to regain its position in the African continent, and I think our stand behind the government in Syria, I think this is to keep Syria one state. Mm-hmm. This is very important for the security measures, and I think this was behind the movement of our president and the Egyptian Foreign Ministry to rebuild our good relations with Russia, with any other country which has to play a role in the Syrian government. Also, we have sent some naval flotilla to the Bab el-Mandab in Yemen, so that to bolster the Yemeni government against the terrorism which acted by the Houthis. So I think this is very important. In the in the other things, we have also moved in with Ethiopia in the dam, in the Renaissance Dam, and I think we are also continuing our efforts to build confidence with the Ethiopia and Sudan to find a fair solution to this issue. In the other direction, I think the last resolution from the Security Council 2334, I think it was behind the illegality of the settlement in the Palestinian land. I think it was very important and very successful for Egypt policy and Egypt foreign policy to expose this very old issue to the world, and it was the first time since very long time. I think the United States has not used the veto decision to refute the issue. So I think it has abstained, and this is a very good omen to the Palestinians. Although we have withdrawn our support, our advocacy to the solution, but we voted with the Senegal, Malaysia, New Zealand, and the other country I couldn't remember at the moment, and the resolution has passed with full majority, except the United States abstention.
Yes.
So I think we have gained so many footsteps, and we have rebuilt our relations with Africa, with the Western world and the United States. It has also some negative effect, that is our relations with Saudi Arabia, our sister country, is not as we hoped for. This is, I think, in general what I see on the international scene for the foreign Egyptian policy.
Yes. Mr. Nassar, now, after the 2011 revolution, Egypt has gone through a lot of ups and downs within its foreign policy and its relations with the international world. And ever since then, we've been talking about Egypt trying to regain its place within the Middle East region, within the African continent, its political weight within the international community. How far do you feel that Egypt has achieved in this regards, and what is still to be done to actually feel Egypt's political weight and political word and say within the international affairs?
Did you mean 2011 or 2013?
2016, actually. How so far? I mean since 2011. No, I mean, everything changed after the 2011 revolution. So where do you see it right now in relation to what it has been
well,
before?
from 2011 to 2013, the world was watching, waiting for Egypt to unfold.
Yes.
But the problem started to happen after 2013 revolution. Because it was perceived and propagated by the enemies of Egypt as a coup, not a revolution. So most of the Western world took a position against what happened in Egypt. And it took Egypt some time to repenetrate their existence in the Western world. It started with Cyprus, Greece, very astute moves. I mean, Sisi started to penetrate Europe from the south, through Cyprus, through Greece, through Italy, France, and then started to handle the Teutonic Germano-Anglo-Saxons, and he did it very well. In the same fashion, he started to approach Africa, because if you remember, after 2013, the African Union took a position against Egypt. So he handled the Eastern African plateau very well. He jumped onto the Western African plateau, so he handled the African panoramic view in an extremely professional way. The same goes for Russia, China, Japan, and India. So he handled Asia very well. I will join Ambassador Dr. Borhan that the countries that were supporting Egypt during 2013, such as Saudi Arabia, is now having some sort of bad feeling about Egypt. It's not going to take a long time. It will go back into the Egyptian perspective. However, we started having some problems with the Gulf, and the Gulf is so strategic to Egypt in the same fashion that Egypt is so strategic to the Gulf as well. We handled the Syrian dilemma in an extremely professional manner. We teamed up with Russia, and Russia kind of tamed down Turkey, controlled Iran, and the end result for the Syrian dilemma is a resolution that Egypt is endorsing. And all of a sudden, Trump wins. So the whole conspiracy or the whole plot that was led by the United States and some allies in Europe is
changing.
Is dead. So Trump is on the scene. He approached President Sisi on the resolution for the Palestinian issue. Some people took it in the negative fashion. I took it on the very positive fashion because the resolution was going through anyway. But President Sisi wanted to score a point with the Trump, especially that knowing Obama is trying to sabotage Trump's presidency. So he did it very well, and he voted for the resolution. So generally speaking, what was done and achieved in such a limited time is phenomenal. And we have to thank President Sisi for this, and we have to thank the foreign ministry as well, doing a very good job.
And what do you see would later on? How do you see these? I mean, the bases are there with all of these countries within the European continent, the Asian continent, with America. How do you see these bases really progressing and developing for the new year?
It will definitely progress the economical situation. The investments will start to pour in. As the report was saying, tourism from Russia and possibly from Italy and possibly from Germany will pour in as well. So economically speaking, Egypt would have a better future. Politically, it will start what happened on the international front because of the immense of the conspiracy that was there against Egypt, because Egypt was so dimensional in the American plot, trying to change the panoramic political sphere of the Middle East. And Egypt have avoided the plot. So Egypt is so important. Handling the international scene in that professional fashion will start to have its effect on the internal political front as well. The internal factions that were supported and paid for by the West, especially the US and its puppets like Turkey and Qatar, will be eliminated from the political scene. So I see 2017 as a very prosperous year for Egypt.
Yes. Ambassador Dr. Borhan, you've mentioned Egypt's relations within the African continent, and you've mentioned a very important issue that has been really under the spotlight for many years here in Egypt, which is the Renaissance Dam built by Ethiopia. And year after year, it seemed like really the thorn at Egypt's back is really the issue that hasn't been resolved. The three countries meet. We use the help of consultancy firms from around the world, from France, waiting for their results, signing agreements to abide by whatever results, just to secure Egypt's share of the Nile water. How far do you think this situation is developing, and does it look promising for Egypt and whatever the outcome of these consultancy firms come up with?
In my opinion, I think it is early time to predict what will happen with Ethiopia. But I think if we have to have confidence building measures with Ethiopia and with Sudan, this is very important because Egypt and Sudan is down Nile and downstream, and I think Ethiopia and the other African countries is upstream. So we are depending on 80% of the Nile waters from Ethiopia, and it is very important that we rebuild our relations with Ethiopia through many factors, because I think Ethiopia has been all along friendly to Egypt. We have co-founding the African Unity or African Organization, and the Egyptian Coptic Church has very good relations along history with the Coptic Church in Ethiopia, because we follow the Orthodox cult. So I think this is very important that we rebuild our confidence with Ethiopia, and I hope that during this 2017 year, I think the experts will present their report, and we could start the negotiations, real and serious negotiations with Sudan and Ethiopia to secure our share from the water, from the Nile water, and I think it might happen this year. I think if we just follow up the serious negotiations, follow up the confidence building measures with Ethiopia and with Sudan, and I think as I have already told you so many months ago, that unfortunately the file within Egypt or within the organization of Egypt, either the Ministry of Irrigation or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the other organizations, have been ill-handled. And I think this is time. I think it's the proper time to start seeing the strategic position of Egypt, the strategic waters, and the importance of the Nile to Egypt, and for the future generations, for the land reclamation, for land agriculture, all those, it is very, very important.
Well, if we just assume the worst case scenario, that the consultancy firms come up with a report and a conclusion that doesn't really, I mean, it doesn't really play favorably for Egypt's share of the Nile water, or it comes out a positive report, but still one of the two other countries doesn't really abide by this conclusion and what it entails. What do you see would be, what would you say would be the next move by the Egyptian government?
Say if what the worst has come, I think, and the negotiation has failed between Egypt and Ethiopia, I think we have to go to arbitration and or the international court. I think the international law is within Egypt. I think I supports the views of Egypt, because we have historical rights. We have treaties, 1902 treatment, other treatment with Ethiopia, and to secure the share of Egypt in the water Nile. So I think lastly, after we exhaust or peaceful negotiations with Ethiopia, it doesn't leave us except to go to the international arbitration or to international adjudication. This is, and I think we can, I mean, from now, I think we have to arrange our cards, and we have to arrange our experts, and to support the views of Egypt if the worst comes to the worst. So I think this is very important, because nearly we have no other source except the Nile. Ethiopia has 30 sources, rivers, rains, and it is plenty of water in Ethiopia, and she can, I mean, depend on development on other sources. But Egypt is depending only on the Nile, and we are now 90 million people, and I think by 10 years time we will pass 100 million people. So I think this is very, very, very serious issue.
Definitely.
Not only for Egypt and its presidency or the leadership of Egypt, but also for Sudan and for Ethiopia. And I cannot recall. I can recall what I see President Sadat metaphorically said, that if we have to live without water in Egypt and we are going to die in our country, it is better to die on the mountains of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
This is what President Sadat once said. And I think he was really serious about it.
Well, hopefully it doesn't come to that. Mr. Nassar, now, whenever two heads of state meet, they always discuss combating terrorism as an international phenomenon. And 2016 has witnessed many terrorist attacks all over the world, whether in the States, Germany, France, Turkey, Egypt, many places. Now, how do you see the international community has been performing in this aspect in combating terrorism? Because every once in a while, even though things start calming down and cooling off, we see a horrific terrorist attack that claims the lives of dozens of people around the world. How much do you think has been achieved, and what do we need to do more?
Very important question. But I'll go philosophical about it. Because, I mean, if you raise a wolf, it will bite you. Right? And that's what happened in Europe and the States. They've been raising the so-called Islamists on the promise that the Islamists will take over the Middle East, and then Egypt and the Middle East will be the Mecca for the immigrants, or the reverse immigrants from Europe and the States, in order to get rid of their Islamists. So that was one of their ways of countering or handling or combating terrorism. They wanted to get rid of the dangerous elements in Europe and the States by rehabilitating them in their home countries.
Yes.
Unfortunately for them, and fortunately for us, it didn't work. So now they are facing the facts. They're still owning and having and making shelter for the wolves. And the wolves will bite back. So now this is the moment of truth. There is no other way for the West and the US but to follow and listen to the Egyptian way of handling terrorism and combating it. And I don't believe in soft measures handling terrorism, because defining a terrorist, that he took a violent action, so you cannot go soft on regarding a violent action. So you have to take extreme measures in order to combat terrorism. So I think one of the successful elements in 2017 and going forward is that countries will start to bridge together and to listen to what Egypt was suffering from for the past 15 years. Now we're having a listening Europe, because they've been seeing what we have been suffering from since the 90s. With the expectations of not having a confrontation between the US and Russia as the two major superpowers. On the other hand, we're seeing some sort of flirtation between Trump and Putin. It will facilitate creating an international will to combat terrorism, and Egypt will be in the heart of this.
Yes. Well, Mr. Nassar, as you mentioned, a lot of the times Egypt was the go-to country in terms of how to combat terrorism, and knowing the area and knowing the geographical and socio-political nature of this area, knowing exactly the elements that need to be carried out, the steps that need to be taken in combating terrorism. What is the nature of Egypt's philosophy in combating terrorism, and how much do you think the international community, now that they've been bitten by this danger, how do you see them being really listening or following Egypt's lead in this regard?
You're asking very smart questions and tricky ones.
Mm-hmm.
There is the short-term solution and there is the long-term solution.
Mm-hmm.
Philosophically, again, the short-term solution has no mindset.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot counter or combat terrorism with words.
Mm-hmm.
You can prevent terrorism to develop on the long term using letters,
mm-hmm.
using words, using education, using culture. But that's a long-term process.
Yes.
In order to prevent terrorism from developing.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're having terrorists on the ground.
Yes.
How can you handle them? I don't believe in muragaat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you do the interpretation for it. I don't
mm-hmm.
have an English proper word for muragaat.
Mm-hmm. Revision.
Revision.
Well, revisions.
Mm-hmm.
Revision is a kind of
reassessment
yeah.
of the situation. Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in it, and it failed, and it just another way of getting soft,
mm-hmm.
having a soft belly, right, handling
mm-hmm.
terrorism. As I've said earlier, terrorism is a violent action.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be countered by a semi-violent action.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be countered by extreme measures. Otherwise, things will unfold, and all the countries in the world will suffer.
Yes.
Someone recently said that it seems we cannot win against terrorism. It was said 2 days
mm-hmm.
ago. Hence, we have to be extreme, tenacious about
yes.
handling terrorism. Otherwise, we have no goals.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely one of the areas and countries that have been really under the spotlight, with a lot of developments taking place on the ground and taking a lot of attention in the international scene, is Syria and resolving its own conflict. Now, Russia has been taking part in resolving it along with Turkey, Iran, and now Egypt might be coming into the equation. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has expressed the hope that Egypt will join negotiations on the Syrian settlement in Astana, while Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan and Iraq could join them at subsequent stages. At a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, which focused on the agreements on a ceasefire in Syria and the beginning of negotiations, Lavrov said, considering all consultations, Moscow was beginning to get ready for the meeting in Astana together with the Turks and Iranians. The Russian top diplomat said that given the importance of expanding the number of guarantor states, Moscow considers inviting Egyptian counterparts to join those agreements. He noted that the issue was discussed during a telephone conversation between Putin and President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi last Thursday. Lavrov said that in the future, at some stages, perhaps Russia needs to attract some other key players which have an importance on developments in Syria, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iraq and Jordan, adding that the UN's representative would be invited as well, which will make it possible to ensure the continuity of the political process. Lavrov noted that the Syrian settlement process launched by Russia and Turkey and supported by Iran have been held in competent UN General Ban Ki-moon and the organization's new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who will assume office next year. The command of the Syrian armed forces has declared a nationwide ceasefire from midnight on December 30th local time. The document said the ceasefire would not cover the Daesh terrorist group and Jabhat al-Nusra terrorist group, and also the affiliated armed groups. The Syrian Army Command said the ceasefire agreement had the goal to create the appropriate conditions for the process of political settlement of the crisis. Egypt could take part in peace talks between the Syrian regime and the rebels next month in Kazakhstan, as reports have emerged that Egyptian peacekeeping troops could be deployed there. Meanwhile, Cairo believes that the principles proposed by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to revive the Middle East peace process are mostly consistent with the Egyptian vision, But it is important that those principles are implemented eventually. Ahmed Abu Zaid, the foreign ministry spokesman, said the vision proposed by Kerry would need to be fully studied and evaluated, revealing that the Secretary of State spoke with his Egyptian counterpart, Samir Shukri, about some aspects of his vision in recent months during his talks with the major international and regional parties involved in the peace process. In his speech, Kerry criticized Israel, which he said was undermining the two-state solution. He proposed 6 principles to relaunch the peace process between Israel and Palestine, including the recognition of the 1967 borders, presenting a fair, acceptable and realistic solution for the Palestinian refugees.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Ambassador Dr. Borhan, Egypt coming into the equation in solving the Syrian crisis, taking a mediating role. Now, Egypt has been quite diplomatic about the situation in Syria. What can Egypt offer to this Syrian crisis? How well do you think Egypt can play the role of mediating between the government forces and the rebels? We've seen a lot of developments taking place over the past month or so. The government forces are advancing in Aleppo. What is the situation right now in the Syrian conflict, and how does Egypt play into it after the ceasefire that was agreed?
Unfortunately, it is a very unpleasant and bitter situation for every player in the Syrian scene. So many international interventions are playing roles. We have the United States, we have Russia, we have Turkey, we have Iran, we have Saudi Arabia, we have the Gulf and Qatar and all those players. So I think so many hands are playing in the scene. So I think this is to the nasty effect of to find a better solution for the crisis. I think Egypt has to build its relationship not only with the government, I mean the government of Bashar al-Assad, but also with the other fellows, I mean the opposition. I don't think, in my opinion, that we have good relationships or to have confidence of the opposition to mediate between the government and the opposition. But so many other players like Saudi Arabia or Russia or the United States and Turkey are in a better position than Egypt in this place. So I think we have to put our hands with either Turkey or with Russia or with the United States, and we have to build also our relationship with Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is very important. She is supporting the opposition. She wants Bashar al-Assad to leave, and the Russian government or the Russian views that they are supporting Bashar al-Assad to the end. I think the situation we have overlooked the people, the Syrian people. The Syrian people are suffering. Half of the country is ruined. Half of the population is outside. Immigrants to many countries, including Egypt and including Europe and the United States. So the situation is very unpleasant. We have to care for the people. We have to care for the Syrian people. Not only to care for the government, to Bashar al-Assad to stay or to leave, but leave the position of Bashar al-Assad to its people. If they wanted him to stay, he will stay. If they wanted him to leave, he must leave. But to ruin the country or to bring every building to ruins, I think this is unpleasant and very, very nasty situation for everybody. Yes. And my heart is with the people of the Syrian people.
Yes, definitely. Well, Mr. Nassar, it is a tricky task to actually mediate between the government and the opposition in Syria. But not just that, there are so many players, as Mr. Ambassador mentioned. Turkey is playing a big role in it, also Russia, Iran and other countries. Now, Egypt is a strong supporter with Russia. They have really good ties, but the relationship with Turkey has been quite ups and downs. Same thing with Iran as well, a country that is trying to really establish its power and its dominance within this region. So it seems that Egypt is really mediating and trying to coordinate relations with many players and many parties, not just the Syrian parties. How much do you think Egypt would achieve in such a task? And is it the smartest move for the Egyptian foreign policy to get involved really hands-in this situation? Definitely Egypt believes that Syria should have, it is an independent state and really values its sovereignty. But how much do you feel Egypt should be involved and what should it do in this critical matter?
Well, first of all, it was never a question of Bashar al-Assad. It was a question of the statehood of Syria. So Egypt never supported Bashar as Bashar. Egypt, after 2013, supported Syria as a state. And the opposition, or the so-called opposition, is not really there, because even if we have, I mean, a couple of Ba'athis or a couple of even Nasseris, they are overwhelmed by the radical Islamists. In the same fashion that after 2011 revolution here was overwhelmed by the radicals. Egypt took it the soft way in order to counter the plot. Syria couldn't do so. So it went hard. And the battles started to unfold. But now we don't need to mediate with anybody. We're having three clear winners. We're having Russia winning, we're having Iran winning, and we're having Egypt as a tag-along kind of winner state supporting the Syrian unity and the Syrian state. And Turkey started to jump ship after the coup. Remember the Turkish coup that was negated by the Russian intelligence trying to salvage Erdogan. Erdogan started to jump ship. So Qatar is now left alone. Even Saudi, not necessarily Saudi as a state, but some Saudi factions are supporting Jabhat al-Nusra and supporting Daesh. They will have no means of putting armaments on the ground, because that was through the Turkey back door. So the Syrian issue is closed now. Bashar representing state, the state now is winning. He could not be there in 2 years, he could not be there in 1 year, nobody knows. That will be for the Syrian to handle in a democratic way, not in a combating fashion. So I see the Syrian case closed. I see Russia is winning, and I've said that 5 years ago. I said Bashar will stay, because Russia cannot sacrifice such a strategic route to the Mediterranean. And it was, at the time, their only route to the Mediterranean through Tartus. And there is the gas element as well, because part of the plot, part of Qatar leading the regional elements of the plot against Egypt and the so-called Arab Spring was trying to find a path for their gas through Jordan or Iraq onto Syria, onto the Mediterranean, to Europe. So there is the gas conflict now between Qatar and Russia, and Qatar and Egypt, and even Egypt and Russia, because Egypt, starting 2017, 2018, will have their own gas pumping as well.
Yes.
So there are so many elements in the Syrian panorama. But I think Russia strategically secured Syria, and everybody will tag along. And even Putin and Lavrov are playing it very, very calm. They are inviting people, and then they will invite the UN, but they are the four countries, Egypt, Turkey, Russia and Iran, will develop the Syrian future.
Yes. Well, Mr. Ambassador, you've mentioned before that the situation, the relationship between Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf is not as strong as it was before. Now, over the past few years, we've seen Saudi Arabia helping Egypt and supporting it with a lot of financial aid and financial support. And we've also seen Egypt taking part of a Saudi-led coalition to deal with the situation in Yemen. Now, how did the relationship between both countries change so fast, even if temporarily? And how do you see Egypt dealing within the Yemeni crisis and this issue?
I think the two main issues between Egypt and Saudi Arabia is the situation in Syria and the situation in Yemen. Mm-hmm. The Saudi government or the Saudi king is behind the opposition in a way, and he wants the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, because Bashar al-Assad has committed so many crimes against his people. Mm-hmm. And this is one thing. Egypt was at first we were supporting the views of Saudi Arabia on this issue, but lately we have changed our position because we wanted to see Syria as one state. Mm-hmm. Because I think the plot, as our dear colleague Mr. Nassar has said, the division of the Middle East, not only Syria, but so many countries, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, it is already divided between sectors and, mm-hmm. And factions. So I think the change of the position of Egypt, or the status of the foreign policy, Egyptian foreign policy behind. So yes. This is one of the antagonistic procedure which Saudi Arabia has taken against us. This mm-hmm. is one thing. On the other hand, it is the situation of Yemen. Although we have already sent a small flotilla to the Bab el-Mandab, and mm-hmm. I think to support the coalition between Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states, Emirates, and other countries, I think Jordan as well. So, but the Houthiyyin is still there. Houthiyyin is still gaining power. Mm-hmm. And we have not crushed, the coalition have not crushed the Houthiyyin, because to crush the Houthiyyin you have to send land power or land forces yes. on the ground, mm-hmm. ground forces to combat the Houthiyyin on the ground. So I think this is another differences of opinion between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, because I think Saudi Arabia wants us to send some ground forces to mm-hmm. to combat the Houthiyyin in Yemen, and we have very nasty experience during the 60s yes. of the last century. In Yemen we have lost so many thousands, mm-hmm. Thousands of Egyptians were killed on the mountains of Yemen, and in the conflict between the Gomhuriyin and the Malikiyin. I yes. think the supporters of the king and the supporters of the republic.
Yes.
So I think this is also another bad omen in the situation between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. But I think the strategic positions of Saudi Arabia and the strategic position of Egypt, compels the two countries to find a solution to this conflict between them. Conflict not of small interests, not of yes. strategic interests. Mm-hmm. And we have to uphold the strategic interests between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, for not only for the two countries, but for the benefit of the entire Arab countries.
Yes, definitely. Well, Mr. Nassar, because we're running out of time, now you've mentioned that Egypt, Russia, Turkey and Iran will be benefiting from resolving the Syrian situation, which will probably dictate the future of resolving other issues within this region, and really establishes the stronger players or the stronger influencers within these crises. So in less than a minute, can you tell us what is then the role expected to be played by the new U.S. administration under Donald Trump?
The U.S. for some time, for nearly 10 years, mm-hmm. Have been kind of phasing itself out of,
yes.
of the Gulf region and the Middle East, because the strategic importance of oil, of underground oil, is not that important now to the United States after the discovery of the shale oil.
Yes.
But Trump will handle the situation well, and Egypt is extremely well positioned into the formula. There are no friends and foes in politics. There are always interests. And Egypt is protecting the interests.
Definitely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. We're going to be following up all the latest developments of Egypt's foreign policy here on Nile International. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Mr. Hossam Nassar, the former First Secretary of the Ministry of Culture. I'd also like to thank Ambassador Dr. Samir Borhan, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.